Thank you, Cynthia. We have a raised hand from John.
Thanks for the presentation, Cynthia. You left out a rather important detail. What led to the creation of the non-aligned movement and the Bandung conference. And that's the assassination of Stalin and the coming of power of Khrushchev in the Soviet Union, where all of a sudden all of the policies developed in the previous 15 years in the Soviet Union, and which both with respect to internal development and with respect to the relations, most importantly with the People's Republic of China, were radically transformed. And China, which had been fully, China's rise as an independent power, notwithstanding, was led under the leadership of course, Mao Zedong, but with massive input and support from the Soviet Union. And you did mention the fact that there was a treaty of non-aggression signed in 1939 between the Japanese and the Soviet Union. But this was after a major battle took place in Manchuria, where the Japanese were routed. And this non-aggression pact was necessary for the Soviet Union to be able to face the Nazi onslaught. And so what happened is in 1950.
John, I don't think I mentioned that. I mentioned the Hitler neutrality pact, but I agree with what
you did. You mentioned that the Vietnamese.
Yeah, I just didn't want to get into that can of worms because I wanted to focus it more.
But I mean, the problem is, I think it's implicit in the fact that you're relying on Mike Billington, who was viciously anti-communist and then nothing positive to say either about the Soviet Union or the Communist Party of China, and so the end result is that we don't really understand why the non-aligned movement was created. In fact, China, after the radical turn with Khrushchev, was forced to come up with its own policy separate from the Soviet Union.
John, Mike Billington actually brings that up. I wouldn't say such strong words against Mike Billington. I do think he doesn't fully understand the story around Stalin, but he also recognized that Khrushchev was a tool played by the British through Averell Harriman. He talks about that.
Well, that's definitely the case. Yes. The point is that not only did Khrushchev destroy the internal development of the Soviet Union, turn back all of the positive things, many of which only got revived in the last couple of years in the modern Russian Federation. So that's a huge gap. But Khrushchev was openly and publicly insulting the People's Republic of China as well as its leadership, and so China was forced to find ways of quote surviving because they could not guarantee that they would have the military protection of the Soviet Union in a confrontation with the United States.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So anyway, this is just a. Clearly the back and forth between Britain and the United States during this period is important, but I think it's also important to understand the dynamics of Russia during this period as well and how they interacted.
Well, I mean, this is the thing is that I think that you have to take it step by step, because today the problem isn't the relationship between Russia and China. Today, the problem is the relationship, namely between the United States and China, the United States and Russia. So for this lecture, I mean, it's very much aimed at an American audience, for an American audience to understand what America did, what was the American role in all of this, which is important, because it's the United States right now, which is very much lacking in any understanding. And you have to take things step by step. You can't talk about all of the dynamics of the history, but I don't think I represented China in a way that was like not a nice picture. And I certainly didn't speak about Stalin in a bad way. The reality was that when Stalin did the neutrality pact with Hitler, which I wrote a paper on this for why he did it.
Hold on, with Hitler or with Japan?
Huh?
There's two separate treaties, one with Japan and one with Germany.
Neutrality pact with Hitler. I'm not talking about the neutrality pact with Japan.
Okay, because you had mentioned that with respect to Vietnam.
I don't think I did.
You said that Vietnam had opposed the neutrality pact with Japan.
No,
the Ho Chi Minh.
Yeah. What happened with that is that when Stalin declared neutrality with Hitler, because he was buying his time, I don't believe that he was a supporter of Hitler. That it's an insane thought to think that he was, because it was very clear that Hitler was for the genocide of the Slavic people. But when Stalin was having this kind of period of time where he was, I think, trying to prepare himself, there were other countries, like other Asian countries, that were also either neutral, or they weren't fighting against the Japanese fascists, or they were even considering them in some ways as liberators of Western imperialism. What I was saying is that Ho Chi Minh and the Chinese communists did not, they were not neutral with the Japanese, but other Asian countries were. But that's a good thing that they weren't neutral. You see, and then the Asian countries like Sukarno, okay, who did work with the Japanese fascists. Although, to be fair with Sukarno, he didn't have much of a choice. Indonesia was occupied by the Japanese, and they allowed him to organize. And I think that he did the right thing in that situation. But then people like Sukarno were then punished after World War II. For that stance. But then, there was hypocrisy, because the Chinese and Ho Chi Minh were fighting the Japanese fascists, but then they were still treated like they were somehow traitors.
All right, I'll leave it at that, and we can discuss this later.
We that will fuel some good conversation. We got a couple of questions still on the list. The first one, or the next one, is from Satomi.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you, Cynthia, for for that. Is it Banglang conference? I mean, I've never heard of that, but I'm wondering if China right now is more of a economic imperialist, because it's quite different from 1955, China's situation, and now, and like how they're going into every country and really economically dominating. And I'm wondering, like, I kind of think that now we're in a kind of a economic war for resources. Like, it's really, and why are, I think if we ever did a kind of a follow the money and seeing what, like, why are the British so interested in those countries? Like, what are is there resort? I mean, of course, the Opium War was one of them, but are they after the resources? For surely they're not after just to be dominating over the people. They must want some resources, just like Venezuela, that, where China, Russia, and America, I mean, it was so rich in oil and gold. I'm just, just putting that question there, that is this a race for resources now?
Well, I would ask you, Satomi, where are you getting your idea of China from?
Well, just listening to a lot of the news and just and finding, knowing that where there a lot of the economic influences, like Africa, they've been in there quite a lot. And has
hold on.
Africa become any more
But
possible?
hold on, Satomi, hold on, because this is the fundamental question, right? Is where are you getting your information from, and how are you verifying that information? So I think one of the major problems that's going on right now between the disconnect in understanding is that people are not going to the source and looking at what the source is saying. In this case, China. What is the Chinese government saying that they are doing? What is you live in the West, so what are the Western newspapers saying? And then if we're going to talk about Africa, for instance, what are the Africans saying? And the African leadership saying? Okay, so it's important that when we go about getting our information, because I think that it's rather naive to just listen to the Western newspapers. Right now, the foreign policy on China is that is an unfriendly foreign policy. It's been an unfriendly foreign policy since the Opium Wars. It's never been friendly for that entire period. I think it's important that Westerners not only understand the history of what the Western system has done since the Opium Wars and continues, and the opium situation is still a major problem in the world, and they're even trying to blame China right now for some of this, which is another thing that I can't get into because it's so heavy of a subject. I hope to write a paper on it eventually, but we have to really, you can't just look at the headlines. You have to look at what is the direction that the West has been in. Ask yourself the question, has the West changed its interaction with China? Because what I can tell you, but it won't matter so much if you don't verify it for yourself, right? Because it's like an argument of statements. It doesn't mean anything. If it's all about like, well, I choose to believe this, I choose to believe that, instead of like really going into verifying these things. Because I can tell you, China is not, it is not a zero-sum game approach. And the Chinese have been in Africa now for a while, and it's very easily verifiable to look at what are the quality of actions that are going on. And it's irresponsible that, we toe a line of aggression without fully looking into what are the facts of the situation. The facts of the situation is that Western economics, especially through the City of London, which is still the dominating financial structure in the world, is what has been looting Africa over.
Oh, yeah, well, I totally agree with that. Like the imperialists, the imperialism, and I think like Kennedy said, just not only the Western imperialists, but the Soviet, the communists is as well. So I'm just trying to.
So what do you mean? Like that, for instance, Mao Zedong's presence in Africa, one of the biggest things that he did was to build the Tanzania-Zambia rail line called the Freedom Rail in Swahili. And this was built with Chinese money when the Chinese didn't even have enough to have, like, for everybody to have meat. It was considered a real luxury. And I think it was only the young that would have or the olds that would have the meat, and anyway, there was not enough meat for every member of the family, but they were investing in projects like that for their African brothers. And this railway line was done pretty much for free. Okay, that's in comparison to what the British and the Dutch have done, the Germans, the French. I mean, it's just incredible though. Like, how many people talk about what Mao Zedong did in this case? Like, nobody even knows about it. So,
well, it's kind of hard for me to, I mean, sure, we do all these good works, but how do we really know what the ulterior really motive is in the end?
But what do you mean by this?
I'm not questioning
this
that.
rail line didn't go. This rail line was
sincere.
for transportation. This rail line was for the benefit of the people, whereas all the other rail lines that were built by colonial powers were for looting resources from the mine to the coastline. You can very easily verify the intention. You can, because if you say you can't verify the intention of Mao Zedong, it means you can't verify the intention of anybody. It means that you don't know how to know intention. Okay, so there, these qualitative actions in terms of like development projects, they are so clear in terms of what the philosophy is. And there is no such thing as the debt trap either. And I can include an article, a link to an article for this video when it gets up on YouTube, where people can read a well-done article by Hussein Askari on this. But you know, people at this point, like, we are in a situation of a confrontation of war. We need to be much more responsible and rigorous with how we are getting our information. And it is just so clear all the crimes that have been committed on the Western side, that at best there's like equal blame, but there isn't even that, right? Like, there's no way that the West should be in this situation thinking that they have any kind of moral platform to speak and tell other people what to do. It's very serious. But not only that, what's worse is that it's missing a beautiful opportunity. We don't have to go along this line. It's completely unnecessary.
Okay, well, I was just asking, and yes, I agree that, yeah, we have to actually check our sources and maybe follow the money where it's all going, or I find that's also very helpful, but thank you.
I can send you a paper that was that goes through that in a really rigorous manner in terms of the accusation of the Chinese debt trap.
Yeah, I actually just saved that in the chat box, so people can access it right now in the chat.
Yeah, and it will be included in the YouTube video as well, because this is the thing. If China is doing these development projects, it's not a debt trap, and it's not for their presence to continue in these countries, which again can be verified, because they are taking people from these countries and they're putting them through schools of engineering and so forth. And the whole point is for it to be operated by the people, for it to be owned by the people of those countries. This can all be verified, okay? So if this is the case, then what China is doing is in accordance with the American system under Alexander Hamilton, Lincoln, and Henry C. Carey, and the Americans have lost the way, you know? This is unfortunately, I'm sorry that I'm getting a little bit worked up, but at the same time, it's like, you know, this has been going on for many years, and it's, I think, absurd to just read Western newspapers at this point and just take it at that, when the West has done things like the Vietnam War and the War on Terror, the illegal invasion of Iraq, the illegal invasion of Libya, the continued terror on Syria. There's a famine going on in Syria, and American soldiers are taking food from the Syrian people. Like, when is it going to be too much?
Jerry, I know you had a question.
Yes, thanks. Oh, thanks very much, Cynthia. That was an excellent presentation. I have a different kind of question, but I know for myself, looking at this, my problem was whenever I'd read about, you know, the Vietnam War or Indonesia or the Philippines or India, I would look at them, you know, as separate little fights for independence. And I know that's a problem, but that's how I used to think. But particularly when you look at what the British and the Dutch and the French were doing to get back their colonies, they didn't look at it that way. They saw the world picture. That's how they were operating from. And I think you really showed it with Mountbatten, with that SEAC.
Mhm.
He wasn't looking at them at independent little movements here or there, countries here and there. He was looking at, one picture of it all. And I kind of got the idea too with the conference, the Bandung conference, that like people like Suharno, they were starting to see it from that point too. They were looking at the world picture, not their own individual countries. But what's your view on that? Did you think they were looking at the big picture too, or just independent movements?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question. You're saying the 29 countries that participated in Bandung, you're wondering if they were just thinking about their own local regions, or?
Yeah, or were they actually looking at it from a world standpoint, a world picture?
Most
I mean, as
certainly
much
they
as
were looking. Mhm. Most
Yeah.
certainly they were looking at it from a world standpoint, because at that point the Cold War doctrine was being quite heavily enforced, and they didn't want to be put in the middle of that. And again, independence was on the mind of everybody during World War II, and there was still the hope that independence could be won without a lot of bloody war. Patrice Lumumba is another example of someone who said, like, I want to be neutral in this. I don't want to be called a Soviet satellite. I don't want to be called a Western satellite. And this is the important thing for people to understand. Like John Place said, it's important for us to know that the Stalin's Soviet Union is different from Khrushchev's Soviet Union. And this is Khrushchev's Soviet Union that, after 1953, that has caused a lot of this, a lot of these problems from the Soviet Union side. But it's important that we acknowledge that there were so many countries that didn't want to be put in the middle of that. And it was a false facade. But what's very interesting is that so they considered themselves that they were united, right? There's a united brotherhood, sisterhood, that was for just mutual respect, the mutual, recognition of the right to sovereignty, recognition of people's territorial integrity, this sort of thing. So as I was saying before, we don't want to live in a world of one doctrine or another. And that's the way that the Cold War doctrine really sells itself, is that it's one doctrine or another. But the reality is that whenever humanity and civilization have flourished, it's been from an ecumenical standpoint. It's not one political idea pitted against another political idea. If we have an ecumenicism, and again, Sukarno was encouraging this with the idea of Marxism, freedom of religion, and basically, I forgot the third one actually, but this diversified approach meant that people should feel safe to bring up new ideas. I mean, it seems kind of straightforward, but without having to be worried that they're going to be labeled this or that, and things should really be measured qualitatively in terms of what is the intention of those ideas. If it's for the welfare of the people of that nation and it's not at the expense of another nation, these things should be tolerated. In the case of what the Chinese are doing with the Belt and Road Initiative, because I know that this is a very confusing point for a lot of people, they're going into countries, the Belt and Road Initiative wouldn't need to happen so extensively today if these countries would have been allowed to develop when they wanted their independence after World War II. They have been prevented from developing because of the IMF, World Bank contingencies and forms of colonialism that were physical after World War II, and now mostly it's economical. But China recognizes the whole idea with the win-win cooperation is that the prosperity of your neighbor is the shared prosperity of your own people. It makes sense that you don't want to have warfare on around unstable regions, and especially along your borders. You want people to be thriving. You want them to be prosperous. You want them to be well educated and cultured with the understanding of a proper moral value system, which isn't based in any like one religion either, right? So again, this ecumenical approach, as long as you're for the welfare of your brothers and your sisters, there is a lot of flexibility in being able to live with a diverse, diverse ideas, but everybody is still on the same page in terms of the benefit of mankind. And this is really like the only way. We live in a diverse world. We live in a world that has many different cultures, but all these cultures have positive points. And it's good to be challenged in looking at things sometimes from another perspective. But as Sun Yat-sen recognized, there wasn't an opposition to Christianity and Confucianism. The teachings of both were based in the same concepts. And that you'll find that to be the case for many religions and cultures. War, especially in the 20th century and on, has been very clearly, it has not been an organic situation. It's been an enforced foreign policy that has flamed color revolutions, clandestine operations, and even direct military entry into countries. Humanity has been lied to, saying that they naturally will not get along, that they're naturally violent, they're naturally destructive. This has not been the case. Looking at the major interventions that have occurred, and we can see it with Mountbatten's SEAC very clearly with what happened to the Asian theater after World War II. None of it is natural. Of course, there's going to be some agreements. Of course, there can be some fighting, but it is nowhere near the level of what has been fueled and funded by the British foreign policy, which has now the American foreign policy has been taken over by that.
Do we have time for one more question, Cynthia?
Sure.
Okay, Bob?
All right, it's sort of a comment. I don't know how many people are familiar with Quora, but they have it's a website where they have questions, and there are people from all over the world. You have several people you can see from Russia and China with conflicting viewpoints. And to get on there, you notice that the administrator or they definitely have an influence on the subject matter, so that you can see a bias there, but yet it's probably the only website where you have this kind of communication from all over, all points of view. So Cynthia had written recently a long essay where she mentioned a new agency. What was it called? The Global something or other, Cynthia?
Which paper are we talking about?
It's an essay that you had just written, or at least I just recently
got.
Oh,
okay.
Global what?
Yeah, I have to just keep talking. I'll
okay. Yeah. Anyway, it's a new agency that is strictly propaganda, and I believe it's really infiltrating websites like this. Like, for instance, Quora would be ideal because You have people from all points of view. A lot of it you can see is government propaganda, and but you also get the other view, usually from other countries, Europe, Russia, China, but they definitely are able to slant the information according to the question. Now,
it's called the Global Engagement Center.
Global education.
No, Global Engagement Center.
Global
engagement.
Okay. All right. So anyway, you can say, you can understand just from those kind of initials that it's a propaganda outfit, and it's the kind of article, if you actually had that shorter and just went on the globe, that unit, because that's the first I'd seen anybody mention it, Cynthia. So if you could possibly shorten that, because we use it for, I use it for links anyway, and on a website like Quora, where you do have a lot of propagandists that are operating, and to back it up, anything that you say, it's nice to have a link from Cynthia, Chung, or from Matt Eric, or somebody. It doesn't, from different websites that you utilize if it relates to the subject. So as I say, this is a very general thing, but when we talk about propaganda, I think that's important, that we somehow disseminate the information, and sometimes we're just speaking among the choir, and it's websites like that that can have a broader influence, perhaps. That's all.
Luke just took out a little quote. I don't know where you got that quote from, Luke, which reads, global engagement. Oh, it's from your paper. Okay. From where Cynthia wrote, Global Engagement Center is here to make those hard decisions for you. Don't know what to think about a complicated subject? GEC will tell you the right way. Yeah.
There it is. And it was, I had actually used it as a link in some other website. It wasn't Quora, but anyway, it could be useful. But she refers to, Cynthia refers to the Operation Mockingbird and all before. It's a rather long article. If it could be cut down to just that piece, because that's new, that's this global.
So you have a request, Cynthia. There's a request suggestion box to do a.
You did that before. You did that before with the City of London, and that was very useful. I sent that out several times because a lot of people don't know that. And they don't, because of the shorter attention spans, you have to have a shorter article, honing in on it, maybe assuming that they know.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob. Maybe we'll pull Cynthia in front of the camera and get her to do a little.
Put her to work. She gave me homework. I'm going to give her.
Yeah. We might get her to do a little 5-minute video specializing on the Global Engagement Center for your followers. Cool. Okay. So I think we're out of time. There were a couple of other thoughts shared amongst the group on the chat, but we'll have to get to that. I guess we won't get to that today. We do have one more class for this current symposium coming up. Not for the symposium, but for this movement coming up next week, featuring a class by Pascal Chevrier on some of the battles of Franklin Roosevelt and John F. Kennedy in a little bit more detail, and some of the other anti-imperial networks in the 20th century who've been scrubbed out of history. So that'll be next Sunday before we move into the 5th movement in 2 weeks' time. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time this Sunday to join us. And thank you, Cynthia, for sharing your wisdom. It was a really wonderful presentation. And it really got me to, there's so much I realize now that I didn't know that I thought I knew. So I thank you for giving me all of these amazing leads to research now.
Thank you, Christine.
Hello, Cynthia.
All right, guys. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Cynthia.
That was great.
Thank you.
Thanks. Ciao.